Welcome, everybody, to the Nightly News Podcast. This is Professor Paul Miller, and I'm sitting in today with two very, very influential people on this campus to talk about an important initiative called Honors 400, a class that is running currently this term with several students, both in an on-ground and online population, that are completing some major assignments and we've got some major things going on, so we're going to let them talk about that. So we are joined by Dean of the Professional Studies, Matthew Vickless. Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Paul. It's great to be here.
Well, we've been talking about this for such a long time, having you down, so it's good that we were finally able to get you down here, because you, of all the people that I've had on the podcast, you've got like the best radio voice of everybody.
Oh, high praise indeed.
And we're also joined by Dean of the Humanities and Sciences Department, Dr. Melissa Wehler. Dr. Wehler, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me back.
Of course. And this is your third time, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe so, yeah.
And you are actually going to be with us on the second segment of today's podcast, talking about some research that you've been doing and your recent research colloquium series presentation on Jessica Jones. So we're going to keep you after this part of the podcast, and we'll chat a little bit more about that in a bit. Also joined today by two students that are Nightly News Club members, Secretary Dylan Kleintop and Nightly News photographer Michael Ademola. And they're going to talk about how, and they are actually on the same team on this particular project that they're doing, and we're going to have them chat about some of the things that they're working on this. So, gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right. First of all, I want to educate the listeners quite a little bit about where this class came from. This is only the second time that this class has ever run, and this was something that had we been talking about for a long time. It almost seems like since I first came on full-time in 2016, we've been talking about this in some type of iteration. But as anybody who knows anything about higher education, even when you're trying to get new classes on the books and things like that, it does take some time. We want to make sure that the courses that we're running are well thought out, and that they go through the proper channels through curriculum review and things like that. So we have been talking about this for a while, but it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was fall the first time that it ran.
That is correct, yeah. And we ran it, it was great because we had it on the books and we just had not gone through the process yet. And so I had a student come to me, actually, a nightly newser, of course, because they're always rocking and rolling on the campus. And Yuli came to me and said, I see this is on the books. I'd really like it to run. How do I get it to do that? And so we talked about, how many students we would need, the qualifications for those students. It is an honors class, so we do require a GPA and an approval by my office. So you can't just register for the class. You have to go through those approval processes. And we talked to the chair of Humanities, Jared Reif, who helped the students get their applications together so that they could come to the office of the dean. And all of those applications did come through, and we had 4 students in our inaugural class. And so it was completely student-focused. It was completely student-run. I was thrilled that students came to me and said, we really want to see this happen for us. And what was really cool is a lot of them were getting ready to graduate. They were either within 1 or 2 terms of graduation. So they wanted to leave a legacy at Central Penn. And I think that was a wonderful way to do it. And it is really one of my favorite things about working here is because students can leave that legacy. So they they were trailblazers and they charted the path. And as a result, we had 10 students in this next cohort. So, again, it is really a tribute to them and their trailblazing.
So back to that original class and you said you had 4 students. Mm-hmm. What did they do as part of their project? So basically this is sort of a group project. Yes. It's a collaborative effort in which there's sort of one thing produced, mm-hmm. whatever mm-hmm. that is. And so what was the first time around? What did they do?
They were analyzing student involvement in clubs and organizations on the campus, and they did a lot of secondary research about why students should get involved and all the benefits of getting involved. And then they decided to work with Adrienne to help promote the text messaging system on campus. We have a really great text messaging system that allows Adrienne to push out activities reminders and information. She just pushed out a notification about a survey that we're doing about student scheduling. So it's a really important system that students just didn't know anything about. And so they help promote it, they help students sign up for it, they worked with Adrian about, how do we get this into the hands of new students, and then they did this really great presentation, and it was really interesting because the people who came to the presentation also didn't know about it, so they were able to also inform the people who were there as well. So
fantastic. Now, is this something that you envision, looking sort of at the long-term perspective, is this something that you envision running once a year, twice a year?
Well, it is very student-driven, so whenever we have student interest, usually what we do is we collect students. So if a student would come to us, maybe one or two of them come, and then we say, we don't have enough to run a cohort because the minimum to run the course is 5. Once we hit 7, we break it up into 2 different sections. We've never had that problem before, but this term, it's a good problem to have. We have 2 sections of it running this term. And so whenever we get people who are interested, we collect their names, and then whenever we have a full cohort, we run the class. So we've been able to run it now in the fall and in the summer, so we're hoping to run it at least once a year. I don't want to run it any more than twice a year because I think that it's really hard to come up with new projects constantly, and it's a lot of wear and tear on the people who teach it because we're helping to facilitate these really big projects. So once, maybe twice a year.
So, Dr. Vickless, I'd like to bring you in on this conversation because this is your first opportunity to teach this class.
That's correct.
Can you tell me how you got involved with this?
I've been tangentially involved with it in that this class has assisted some of our undergraduate organizational leadership students in the previous cohort and in this cohort. We were able to have it satisfy one of the program requirements for that program as we teach it out. So I sort of got involved that way, and then I keep my hand in, although I am the Dean of the School of Professional Studies currently, I try to keep my hand in teaching in the School of Humanities and Sciences where I started. And so occasionally I'm always on the lookout for opportunities. This presented itself, and I seized it because, as Dr. Wehler said, this is really a great opportunity to work with our students in a different way, in a way that really asks them to apply a lot of the learning and the skills that they acquire in their major courses of study. And so it's really exciting to be able to work independently. So when the opportunity came up, I was thrilled.
Well, one of the things that I always try to do, and Dr. Wehler, you and I have talked about this, especially with the job shadowing initiative that we've been working on, and I also taught the projects in corporate communication, not quite what you guys were doing, but still something quite similar, working and doing this type of project-based learning, which I think can be very, very beneficial, mainly because one of the things that a lot of employers want to see are these types of projects that are on a student's resume. They go into an interview and they might ask, well, what are some of the types of projects that you've worked on? And then that is immediately going to come to the top of their memory and how they can share that. Because a lot of what we have to do, and I try to explain this to students all the time, is this is what we do on a daily basis. We find issues that are going on. We do research about them. We propose some type of solution and we present it to whether it be you or whether it be people in other departments, the people who are sort of in charge of making the decisions. And so this is a really, really good opportunity for students to practice the skills that they're going to need in almost any job, in almost any professional job. That's part of your job. It might not be your entire job, but it's certainly part of it. Finding solutions to problems, figuring out how to implement them, and figuring out really how to convince the powers that be that it's a good idea. Because, listen, every time you have a proposal, it's not always going to be accepted. It may be scrapped entirely, or it might be, well, this sounds good, but there's still a few things that you can change. So I really do think it's unbelievably applicable. Also, for many students, this is an elective class. And so this... Not to say that any of our classes are better or worse than anything else, but I think that this gives a really excellent opportunity to show teamwork, to show leadership, and to actually, back to your point, leave a legacy. What were some of the outcomes of the original Honors 400 class?
We had a dramatic increase in the number of students who were using the text messaging system, and as a result of that, we had a lot of students joining clubs and organizations that they didn't know anything about because they came out to an event. And then for the students who actually worked on the project themselves, the biggest benefit that they came back and told me about was that they got to know people outside of their major that they would never have gotten to know in a very intimate setting. And that's what I really like about it. It is interdisciplinary. Our students work with students from across the college, across the 3 schools, and because of that, they get to share things. So we have students who are communication students, and their natural abilities are writing and photography and advertising and marketing, but they also get to work with accounting students who are really good at organizing and managing and those kind of things. And so it's a great opportunity to get to know a totally different skill set. And that is what you're going to get on the job market, is you're not going to be in a room full of all communications majors who understand marketing principles and project management and things like that. You're going to get a cross section, and you've got to be able to bring your expertise to the table in a way that's meaningful.
And in a way that's meaningful enough for the people that aren't and don't have the background to understand it. Mm-hmm. Because what's funny is that the further along we get into our majors, the more we are used to some of the jargon. And it's to the point with me, when I'm thinking about how to market a business, it's second nature to me.
Right.
So sometimes I have to make sure, and I hope I'm fairly good with this because I teach people who don't know often much about some of these subjects. I have to make sure that the way I'm explaining something to someone is able to be understood, and that's another really important part of our jobs on a daily basis. So, so let's flash forward. We have, how many? You said 10 students. Mm-hmm. We have 10 students in the class. They've been divided into 2, just for lack of a better word, teams, mm-hmm. Or you could say 2 sections of this class. So what can we just, in however you feel comfortable describing this, because I know that there is a minor element of competition here, so we don't want to give away too much, but can you share with us what your groups are doing in a general sense? And then I'm going to bring Mike and Dylan in, who are members of one of the teams, to talk maybe a little bit more specifically about what they're up to.
Sure. At the beginning of the term, we had both sections did meet in one classroom. We kind of went over the whole thing. What is service learning? What is project-based learning? What is problem solutions? And then we gave each of the teams 3 options. They could do an awareness campaign, they could do a proposal, or they could do a student resource. And so from there, the 2 teams had to decide which of those projects they were going to take on. And in doing so, my team has decided to do an awareness campaign, and they're going to help raise awareness on the campus about anxiety and depression, and they're going to break it up into 2 student populations, the residential on-ground commuter students, and then also the online, just because they face depression and anxiety issues very differently, and they have the same supports, but maybe different knowledge levels about how to access those supports or what supports are available to them, especially our online students, because they can't see the counseling center in person, but we want them to know that those resources are still available to them. Well,
that's one of the things, too, that a lot of the new initiatives we've had in the college, whether it be the Learning Center or whether it be the Counseling Center, even our library resources, since Samantha's been here, have really been targeted on making sure that everybody on this campus or virtually know that these services exist.
Yeah.
Because I do think, and I've certainly spoken to online students, and I'm sure that you both have as well, I do think that sometimes online students feel isolated.
Absolutely.
They feel on an island because they don't really have regular interaction with their professor. I mean, they may submit work or they may, converse via email, but they don't have that, they don't have that ability, many of them, or time or opportunity to come to campus, and might think that a lot of these resources maybe just aren't available to them.
Yes, yeah.
So I'm glad that's one of the big things that we're doing. Dr. Vickless, what is your group working on?
Well, it's funny that you should mention the isolation that an online student may experience, because my group, to my great surprise, selected to take on a proposal project, which in my view was one of the more complicated of the choices that we offered them, because it really does involve, as you said earlier, proposing a solution to a problem that is identified or a challenge that is identified, and then trying to make that case to the decision maker. So in this case, the group identified some of the issues that are surrounding the registration process or the appointment process in the counseling center. That is how a student goes about actually getting an appointment, reaching out, learning what the services are, etc. And very much with the online student in mind, my group has taken on this issue of how can we make the scheduling process more efficient and effective. So they'll be benchmarking some techniques and tools that are used at other schools. They've been in contact with Tom Palmieri, the new counselor. And so at the end of this process, once they develop this proposal, they will actually be making a proposal pitch in a formal meeting that's already been scheduled with Tom and with the interim dean of students, Romeo Azandakon. So they will have the chance to potentially influence the operations of the counseling center, which is really exciting. So we really are seeing this in action.
That's fantastic. And what's very interesting, too, gentlemen, both of you and a couple of other students that are in the Honors 400 class are in my English 425 class, and we're actually doing a whole unit on how to write a proposal. So hopefully that's something that you'll be able to use in your class for your proposal. So, all right, Dylan and Mike, I'm going to start with Dylan, and I just wanted to talk to you about this whole process. For number one, this is probably at a minimum, one of the most unique classes you've ever taken, because it's really student-led as far as what you want to do. So when you first signed up for this class, now that you've been in class for, we're in week 6 when we're recording this, now that you've been in class for, a month and a half, how have your impressions of or expectations changed over the last month?
Yeah, so when I first joined this class, it was, Brian Christiana, president, he actually talked me into it. He's like, hey, I'm joining this class. You should join it. It's fun. We don't really have class together, I'm like, okay, what is it? And he's like, it's just a group project. I'm like, oh, that's fun. That's easy. But since...
Well, trust me, not everybody thinks that way. And in fact, a lot of time when you go into class and say there's going to be a group project, there's a collective groan or sigh.
Absolutely.
And I try to always... I actually just had this conversation with you when you had Coach Fisher on, and that part of why sports is so important is because it helps you build teamwork, but this also does the same kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I like group projects because I like getting other people's thoughts into it and trying to expand. It makes the project easier than just working by myself, because I'm a business major, so everything to me is business, money, what can I do with this? Whereas Brian, he's also in my group, communications major, as Mikey, communications major, they like the talking, they like to go out and do different things. So it, like she said before, it works when you're trying to get everyone together, different majors. It's kind of cool. But when this project started, we didn't know what we really wanted to do, because there's a lot of things we could do. We had a couple different options, and we didn't actually get started on it until about week 3, so we were behind. But since then, we've met every week, and we've definitely gotten a lot further than where we were. And I know Dr. Vickless was a little worried because we got off to a late start, but now he's helping us along, and he seems pretty excited about it, and I know we're excited about it too.
Well, he doesn't just seem excited, he is excited, because it's one of the greatest things a professor can ever see is when everything all adds up and comes together for the greater good of the class.
Yeah, that's right. And I will say that the group really has come together in a remarkable way, and what is taking shape is really exciting. So Rocky starts off and yield the best projects and results. That's been my experience.
And, just to follow that up, it's so important, because one of the things that I just had this conversation with my group this morning is it's not always about the successes. It's also about the things that didn't go as planned. And you can learn a lot more from the things that don't go as planned, because it forces you to get out of your comfort zone, learn new skill sets, talk to people who you may not have talked to otherwise. So part of why I love Honors 400 is exactly that. I love the rocky start. And I think that it's a much better teaching tool than a perfectly executed plan will ever be.
Of course. Well, now I'm going to bring in Michael Ademla, another one of our nightly news correspondents, and you're also part of this class, and you're also in Dylan's group. Can you share with us how you decided, how you came to the idea of doing what you're doing in your project?
Sure. So the whole idea came from our first session when we met together. What we did was decide to think about what do we think the school is missing. When you do project-based assignments that have to do with providing a service or providing a new outlet, you have to do a SWOT analysis. You have to analyze what are the strengths and weaknesses of our school, what opportunities and outside threats are there outside of the school, and then you have to think, okay, so what can we offer that either isn't being offered elsewhere or is already being offered, so that we're either ahead or right in as far as the loop is concerned. So when we did this project, this meditation, this brainstorming session, as I would say, we ended up coming with our idea, and we decided this is something the school really needs right now. It's kind of like being a communications major in the social media era. You have to analyze problems before they become problems. So it was a matter of thinking, okay, if we do this now, by the time I'm gone or by the time another group member has graduated, this will be in place so that future students can benefit from this effort that we're making.
You know, goes back to the Job Shadow Initiative, because you and Kathleen were the ones who, I mean, we brainstormed as a class, and Dr. Wehler came in and we talked about, hey, let's do a SWOT analysis, and we did one, and we took, I mean, it was almost an entire class that it took us to do it. But what really was interesting and what came out of there is I never even thought about requiring a job shadow. I never even realized that it was something that the students just desperately wanted to do. And now that we've seen it through, and now that we've talked and you know, we want to make it an embedded assessment into one of our courses, it's something that you have changed our department. Because, and what's interesting, Mike, and you know, I did follow up with you about this previously, but not on the air. Didn't it have an impact on you when everybody was presenting their presentations and so many people explained why it was such a big deal to them, and why some people even said life-changing event just by doing a SWOT analysis, by putting it into motion? You guys also did the job luncheon, the job shadowing luncheon, and put all that together too. I mean, it was, didn't it wake you up to the impact you could have?
I'm not going to lie. At first, that day, I was just happy that we were done. Event planning is very, very hard. And I realized after that day that event planning is not something I want to be a part of. But after I finally got to wind down and look back in hindsight, I was like, wow, she said this changed her whole life. Like, I spent 8-9 weeks, but I didn't think it would change someone's entire outlook on their career aspirations, for them to realize this is what I really want to do and this is what I have to do it. I think the job shadowing event overall really showed me what happens when people band together to make a difference. You know, we can look at it from a global scale, we can look at it from a local scale, from a campus scale. A lot of people don't realize the power that they have until they use it, or until they have to come together to use it. And that's what group work is all about. Grab collective parts and try to figure out how to put together. It's like a clock. Every piece of a clock inside has to mesh together perfectly. Otherwise, the clock doesn't work. But when it does, it's a magnificent thing.
Well, and that's what's very interesting is think about all the people who were involved in the execution of this. Yes, you and Kathleen took the lead on this, but certainly Dr. Wehler, certainly all the other people that were in the class that participated in a SWOT analysis. Myself, for being there, all the people who came to campus the day of the job shadowing luncheon and offered opportunities, of which all of the people who came to campus were taken up on those opportunities. And not only that, the networking that happened. So maybe if you worked with Leonard Chester of the Overcame Foundation, the people that you met through him are also sort of an outcome of this. And yes, it did take over 2 different terms to make this happen, but I absolutely think this is something that you can look back on and really point to this in a job interview and say, this is something that I did that's going to create a legacy here. Because this, honestly, I've never been moved as much as I have when you guys were presenting the presentations, because it was person after person. This might have changed my life. Even for you, you realize that some of the things that you may have done on your job shadow weren't necessarily something that you were interested in pursuing a career. But I remember something you wrote in your paper, and it said, you know what, while I might not want to get into nonprofit as a career, I'm always going to be involved in the community because of I was able to see what Leonard does and how Leonard was a mentor to people too. And I thought that was really cool.
Right. Assignments like this really are eye-opening experiences. What I can say that is similar between the Job Shadowing Initiative and this Honors 400 class is that you really recognize, you get a full scope of things. You really recognize what's going on around you, especially when you're a student and all you're thinking is, okay, it's midterms week. What am I going to do to get through this week? You can have that tunnel vision, but you also have a bird's eye view of what's going on the campus. And the number one thing that I can say is that it's about leaving a legacy. The number one thing to be in these type of classes, to be a part of these type of events, you have to be willing to sacrifice the fact that you may not benefit from this. That's a reality. And I honestly feel that if I wasn't willing, because this is my last term, I'm done in 5 weeks, and happily be a graduate of Central Penn College. But I realized early on, by week 3 or 4, that if I didn't care about the future of the school, I wouldn't be putting in the effort that I'm putting in right now. And that's something I have to recognize. Not everyone is built for these type of assignments.
That's a very good point. And I do appreciate everything that you've done in your contributions, and we're certainly proud that you're almost to the finish line. But just underscore almost.
Almost.
You got to finish this project right
I'll
well.
get there.
So, Dylan, I just want to come back to you quickly, and then we're going to wrap up with one final question on maybe how the future of this class is going to be in going forward. Dylan, can you tell us a little bit about what, as much as you care to discuss, can you tell us maybe how you identified this as a problem and what sort of maybe implementation techniques you guys are brainstorming at this point?
Yeah, so we identified this as a problem when, our first option was actually to go along with the food, and we were actually going to speak with the Squeaky Rail Diner and see if we could use our meal plan up there, but that was already jumped upon with the meal plan options on the weekend, so we couldn't really go along with that. So we were like, well, what can we do now? And we know Tom just joined, so why not help a new employee out by giving him something easy and fun to use? So Brian Christiana, he works up in the writing center, and their scheduling is easy because it just comes to Megan and it says name what they need, and so we're like, well, why can't we do this with Tom? It's so much easier than him having to check his email constantly, trying to fit it into his schedule, when we could just make a form for students to use, set times that he is available, they pick a time, it automatically goes into his schedule as their name or just a block, so he makes sure he's there. That's what we want to do. I don't know if I should say much more because our competitor is here, but that is
Go ahead, tell me everything.
That is the overview of the project. And
one question I have about this, when you're talking about dealing with the counseling center, a place where privacy is of utmost importance, and I know that you've addressed this in some form, how are you going to allow that form to remain as private as it needs to be?
Yes.
Have you talked about that?
Yeah, so we have spoken with Tom multiple times about that, and he actually gave us an ethics packet, how what you can use and what you can't use, and he actually said you can have their name, but only I can see it. So what we were thinking about doing is they fill out the form, and she's looking at me. She wants me to say something.
Well, this is a huge concern with the counseling centers because he's the only office, the counseling center is the only office on campus that has that confidentiality. And frankly, that confidentiality needs to remain even in an online space, scheduling appointments.
So so as I was saying, he's the only one that would see their name and what's wrong with them or what they want to talk about. And even if the student doesn't want their name out there, they can select, I don't want my name to be shown, but we'll still block out a time for him, so he knows, hey, someone's coming in at this time. Not really sure who, I'm not really sure what's wrong, but I know I need to be here for this hour because someone needs to talk.
Well, Dylan and Mike both, I really appreciate you talking about your project in a general fashion so you don't give away anything. I do want to point out there will be a public presentation during the Friday of week 10 tentatively, and when that date gets confirmed, we will come back and we'll let you guys know through the nightly news, because I'd love to. I can't wait to be there. I want to come out and support you guys and see what you come up with, because I think this is something that's very unique. So thank you very much. One final question for the both of you. This is something that clearly, in just its first 2 times of running, has made a pretty tremendous impact. Where do you see the future of this going? What are some other issues on campus that might be up for consideration maybe the next time this course runs? Dr. Vickless?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I would answer it in 2 ways. I think it's important that the students that are involved have the principal voice in identifying what the specific issue is. What we've tried to do here is to provide certain frameworks certain project approaches that can facilitate the investigation of a lot of different opportunities or challenges. So I think it's important because the students are the ones closest to the what's happening. I mean, they're the ones that need that voice, and this is a unique way to be able to exercise that. What I would say in terms of the project-based or the problem-based learning writ large, to me, that's where there's a lot of opportunity to be invested at the administrative level and to think structurally now. I think that what I have learned, what's been reinforced through this process for me, is that providing students with some opportunity to really apply the knowledge that they acquire in their courses is really important. And I think that it serves a few functions, right? It's motivating for the students, it keeps them engaged, and it really does manifest, as people have said several times, it gives you a tangible product at the end of the line, right? Often education feels, although it isn't, it feels very transactional. You know, I pay my tuition for X number of credits, et cetera, et cetera. When in a situation like this with inquiry-based learning, what you have is something measurable, tangible, where you see what comes of that education. And I think that there is a structural future there.
Fantastic. Dr. Wehler, what do you think about the future of Honors 400?
I'm so excited, and here's why. Because the first time we ran this, it was kind of difficult to get the 4 that we got. And people came out and they saw their presentation and they talked to them. And those 4 trailblazers were excellent ambassadors for this type of learning on the campus. Central Penn prides itself on hands-on learning and experiential learning, and this is that, and in a very interdisciplinary way. It's not housed in the majors. It's part of general education, our co-curricular experiences. And so that was so important that we got it to run the first time. And now with 2 sections of 10 students, I feel like it has proven itself already in a lot of ways. And to have 10 new ambassadors being able to talk about not transactional, but transformational. We're talking about leaving legacies. We're talking about making an impact. And I love that everybody here said sort of the same thing. It's not about me. You know, we're also teaching students that you're passing it down the line, you're paying it forward. And so if a class can teach you and instill those kinds of principles and reinforce those kinds of principles that our students already naturally have, it's so important. And my hope for the future of this is that our new 10 ambassadors for the class will go out and talk about it. Because like with so many things, you know, as a professor, I hope that me saying to students, please take this class, it's so worth it. Sure, that does have an impact, but hearing your peers say, this will change your life, this kind of class, learning these skills, working with these people, my previous cohort, they still keep in touch. They come back to campus and they meet up for lunch. I think that's wonderful. It builds community and connection not only with Central Penn, but with one another. That's going to last a lifetime. And I think that real educational experiences, those are the kinds of outcomes we all hope that we have. And I think that this class really offers a model for Central Penn in other classes to do something similar.
Well, and I mean, I think you probably have the opportunity to maybe identify students and maybe just go to them directly and say, I think you would be great for this class. We're planning on running it in, I'm just guessing here, let's just say you're going to run it in, next fall or something. Mm-hmm. You can then identify a handful of students, and then beyond that, maybe reach out to people like myself or the advising center or different avenues that we can really kind of push people into this class, because it's not just on-ground students, right? It's right. Evening students, it's online students. Everybody can be a part of this. There just has to be that collaboration between everyone. So
yeah, and I'm teaching the fully online section, so just again, I think that that's part of the reason why my students have taken on the online student population, because that's who they are.
Of course.
And so to have the outreach not just be on campus students, but our online students who maybe don't feel as connected to this campus population and to the Central Penn family, this really gives them that opportunity. And I love that we have online students doing this. They're so on top of it. They meet every week, emails back and forth constantly throughout the week. A lot of planning, a lot of preparation, but it's absolutely possible in the online environment. And I think that some people might have thought, I don't know if I can do this if I'm an online student. And to have that happen for the first time in the second cohort, I think already demonstrates how successful this is.
That's fantastic. Well, I just want to thank everybody. Dr. Wehler, we're going to chat with you in the next segment. But Dr. Vickless, let's not make it another 67 episodes till we have you on. Let's have you back on talking about maybe some things that are interesting to you. I'd love to have you on here in the fall term because I've been wanting to have you down for quite some time. So thank you so much.
You let me know what you need and I'll be here.
You got it.
All right, thanks.
And Dylan and Michael, thank you so much for coming in and spending time talking about your specific presentation. I look forward to the opportunity to see what the fruits of your labor are, and it sounds like you guys are well on your way to doing something that really is going to leave a legacy here. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. Go Team Vickless.
Very interesting. All right, guys, we'll be right back with Dr. Melissa Wehler talking about her recent research colloquium series here at Central Penn and some other research that she's working on. So stay tuned.
This is Dr. Linda Federizi Williams, and you are listening to the Nightly News Podcast.
Welcome back to the Nightly News Podcast. This is Professor Paul Miller, and we are still sitting in with Dr. Melissa Wehler. Dr. Wehler, one of the reasons that I wanted to have you stick around after our Honors 400 discussion was you had the opportunity to recently present some of your research findings here in our once-a-term faculty colloquium research series. That's a mouthful. In which some of our esteemed faculty here on Central Penn College talk about some of the research that they've been doing. This is sort of a shift from our local leader lecture series that we had been doing up until 2017. And so were you one of the people who wanted to move in the different direction to maybe showcase some of our faculty that we have right here as opposed to bringing in people from outside of campus?
Yeah, so I had talked with the faculty, and this had actually been an initiative that they had wanted to see come to fruition for years. And it just so happened that at the same time they were rethinking the previous leader lecture series. And I thought, well, this is a good time to reintroduce this as a possible solution to this rethinking. And I was very fortunate because I had the support of the Center for Teaching Excellence, who offered to organize and sponsor it. And so it just, everything kind of converged in the right way at the right time. And so I was very fortunate to be able to put all the pieces together and connect the dots.
So what you had the opportunity to present about was about Marvel superhero Jessica Jones from the Netflix original series. So this is something that, even by your own admission, not everybody is familiar with. I mean, most of us are familiar with the Avengers and
Sure.
the people that have all of their own movies, one seemingly out, one right after another, which is fascinating that the universe has just been able to explode in the film industry. Why Jessica Jones that really drew your attention and focus in your research?
That's a great question. So I have spent my whole life looking at female heroes and have written and published in that area a lot. And so when Jessica Jones, when I saw the first trailer for that on Netflix, I thought, oh my gosh, I have to watch this. I have to know everything about this character. And female comic book characters are let's say, usually very provocative, but in terms of character development, very light. And so Jessica Jones is no exception to that. Her first incarnation is in the mature content line, and so she's very scantily clad, and she gets into all kinds of adult situations. And so I was really interested to see how they were going to adapt that for Netflix and showcase in this modern moment a hero that would be acceptable to audiences, because the people who are going to watch the show are people like me who, we're not in it for the scantily clad heroines. We're in it to see plot, character development. We want to see complex issues being tackled in a meaningful, substantial way. So I was really interested how they were going to take this character that had something of a checkered past and make it applicable to audiences now. And I was hooked almost immediately, because the character is very complicated. They pick it up in a very difficult part of her story arc. And they introduced my favorite big bad from that particular comic book line, which is Kilgrave. And yes, that is overkill on the name, Kilgrave. And what's really great about that whole character arc is because it gets you into conversations about abuse, domestic abuse, violence, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. And that's a really hard thing for something like Netflix to take on, because it's all about popular entertainment on Netflix. and they're very driven by what is going to entertain their audiences. They keep so much data and analytics that they know what people are going to watch. They know how they're going to watch it, if they're going to binge it, if they're not going to binge it, if they're going to watch it on a Windows or a Mac, and if that makes a difference on what kind of content they like. I mean, it's all data driven. So I was just so interested to see how that was going to look.
What's always been interesting to me about comic book movies or even television shows to a certain extent is they're all relatively PG-13 films, and honestly, off the top of my head, outside of Deadpool, I can't even think of a rated R movie that's a comic book superhero type film. And so then what you're saying is obviously, traditional television probably isn't the place for this, and Netflix probably is the case. Why did they decide, whereas in almost every other situation with superheroes, they're watering it down to get to that teenage audience, why did they decide to go in a different route with Jessica Jones? And it almost seems a little out of character for Marvel.
Yeah, so this is the mature content line, and so this is not your billboard Marvel here. This is not the MCU. This is not going to be your next blockbuster. And so they have those characters because they sell. I mean, obviously, and they sell very well. And so when you had Netflix and Marvel getting into this partnership together, it was very clear what they wanted to do. They wanted to recreate the Marvel Cinematic Universe on the small screen, and they wanted to do it for the audience that don't go maybe to these other big blockbuster movies. And so you had the right format, the right media, the right audience, and you had the right content. And so again, it was all of these things sort of meshing and coming together at the right moment. And what's particular about Jessica Jones, and probably the reason why they started there, is because a lot of outcry had happened with Marvel. We want a female heroine out of this huge universe. Pick one of the ladies, showcase her. And so I think that they heard that from the audiences, and they went with Jessica Jones. Now, of course, that wasn't just a one-off, because they were building up to release The Defenders. And so it is literally the Marvel Cinematic Universe on the small screen. So you have Iron Fist, you have... and that came out after Jessica Jones. You have Luke Cage that came out after Jessica Jones. It's on the second season, so is Jessica Jones. And Daredevil. And so you have all these little shows that create the Defenders, and it's exactly like what they did with the Thor movies and now the Iron Man movies, and then you have the Avengers. So it's a good way to introduce and get people invested in a single character, especially when you have those huge team-up movies, because it's overwhelming to try to learn all of those backstories, and you'll spend a lot of the time learning a backstory when you really want to get to the action. And so this is a good way to build character and plot development, and then also have those great fight scenes.
So you obviously did some research along with this. I mean, that's what you were presenting at the Colloquium series. How did you even go about approaching research in this case?
So research into pop culture, especially contemporary pop culture, is quite difficult. When I was writing about Jessica Jones, it had only been available for maybe 5 months, which is not a long time in the pop culture cycle, especially because it's not airing, episodically. So you don't have people like on the verge of their seats writing about it every week. You have people watching the entire thing and maybe writing one article about it, or maybe, taking on one particular aspect from one episode. So it's not like when you have something on cable television where every episode somebody's writing something good, bad, and different. So what's difficult about that is there's not a whole lot because it's still very new. And then on top of that, you didn't have a whole lot of people diving in deep into each individual episode. So I knew I could not look and see and react to what other people were talking about. I had to take a completely, different angle. Now, obviously, in the comic books, a lot of people had written about Jessica and her PTSD and her depression, so that wasn't necessarily new. And I knew there'd be information out there. And what I was really looking at is how Netflix chose to portray those particular elements of that character, and the technical ways they were able to do that. Because when you adapt something from a comic book, which can be fantastic, because you're not bound by, reality in any kind of substantial way. When you move on to television, you're bound by reality. There's some things we can do, there's some things we can't do. It's becoming less and less the case because we're getting really good with technology and special effects and things like that. But there's still a reality piece to it that we have to, work with, that we don't have to work with off the page. So I was really interested in the technical aspects of the way PTSD was getting portrayed. And because you're tackling something that is so heavy, you have to do it in a way that's really respectful and meaningful and substantial, because if not, this audience is going to criticize you, and you're going to hear about it, and it's going to be over before it started.
What's interesting too is PTSD is one of those types of things that over probably the last decade or so you hear so much more about. There's a lot more, maybe knowledge about there, but I still don't think that we're where we need to be with something as common as it is that we've now realized. So with your research, what were some of the conclusions that you came to?
So I came to some of the conclusions, and I should say here that I am not a psychologist, and so I did not diagnose Jessica Jones. She self-discloses it in the first episode that she's suffering from PTSD, has been to a therapist, is no longer seeking therapy. When I was looking at this particular issue in the series, a lot of my conclusions were trying to understand why the character was being approached in that way, how the writing supported that, what messaging they were trying to get through by using the character and representing the trauma the way they did. My overall conclusion is that Jessica Jones does provide us with a authentic understanding about what it's like to be somebody who suffers from PTSD. Does that mean that it's authentic for everybody? No, but for that character, this representation is authentic to her experiences with PTSD.
Do you think that it has something to do with the specific writers that were brought in, or maybe consultants that happen? I mean, if the way that you're making it sound, it's such an accurate representation. It seems like they did their due diligence behind the scenes to make sure that what they were writing was really on par with PTSD.
Yeah, and it's very clear that that's exactly what happened. So the writing is. In this case, it is less about the writing and it's more about the technical aspects. And so in that way, the people working behind the scenes get all the credit. Unlike a lot of times when you have characters who suffer from PTSD, particularly women, they're not talking about it. That's usually what you see. Somebody's on a therapist couch, they're, divulging all their life history. And in media, that's important to do because exposition is what we have. We can't look inside the person's head. It's not usually really realistic. When you're talking about PTSD, you're usually talking about it in drama. You're not usually talking about it in fantasy and action and adventure. They have certain licenses. They can do certain things that people can't do in other formats. So if you have this huge dramatic thing, usually you have people sitting on, couches and talking about their life stories. Jessica Jones never really mentions it one time, and if you're not paying attention, you'll miss it completely. Instead, it's not about exposition. It's about these technical effects. You see the scenes changing, the lighting changes, her mood changes. You get lost very quickly. The camera moves jerkily. The music changes. All of these things are just a hint, a whisper, and it makes it more realistic because it's not like the dreamy effects of flashbacks like we're used to, especially those of us who may have grown up in the 80s. It's more realistic and it's off-putting and it's unsettling. And I think it's so hard to do that with effects. It's a lot easier to do it with writing, especially if you have really good writers. But to do it with effects, it really adds a different layer to it.
What's interesting to me is, especially, even though she, as you mentioned, she self-discloses only one time, this is something that's got to be a recurring theme, and that maybe the things that she does or the actions that she takes still come with that in the background. And if you missed that in I'm assuming one of the very early episodes, if you miss that, what's going to happen is you are not going to be able to follow along with the show in the same way that you would have otherwise.
Yeah, and what's so interesting was when I was doing my research, I saw a lot of people writing who self-disclosed that they themselves were suffering from PTSD, and they related very much to her experiences. And so that research was really important to what I was trying to argue, because not a lot of clinicians came out and said, yes, this is accurate, et cetera, but you had people who felt comfortable enough self-disclosing that this was representative of their experiences.
So, looking back at your presentation, which was extremely well attended, I'm sure you were very pleased by that.
Yes.
What did it mean to you to be able to present this research to your colleagues and the faculty and staff of Central Penn College?
I love faculty research, especially not just my own, but in general, because a lot of us work so hard, and it's all behind the scenes work. No one saw me working on the article. No one saw me, the hours and hours of transcription, because it's a media. So it's not like a book. You can't pull a quote out. You can't just retype it. You have to listen. You have to look at the closed captioning. You have to check the closed captioning correct. So all of this background work that you do to be able to bring it out into the public sphere and say, look at this, this is months and months of my life, and then to have it well attended. And I'm so grateful for the support here. It's a wonderful validation, not only for me, but for the faculty who present in this series, I think. And the other thing is I love that students came, because again, so much of what we do in our professional lives, not just in the classroom, is hidden from them. And I was very fortunate because I was able to teach Jessica Jones, and students were able to pre-read my article because they were taking a class with me, and I gave them an advanced copy. It was really fun for that class, but to be able to do it in a public forum where you didn't have to be in my class and I wasn't grading you and you didn't have to read it or watch it or anything for homework or expectations like that. It was really wonderful to be able to do that and just share that part of who I am with the college community that maybe people don't know about or didn't get to see.
And it was extremely insightful. I really enjoyed the presentation, so thank you very much for doing that. One final question. Where can people go to find this article? Is it available? How can we find it? We want to read it, especially fans of Jessica Jones.
Yes, so I was very fortunate because I was able to donate a copy to the library. So if you are a Central Penner, then you can go to the library and you can check it out. Otherwise, it is available on Amazon, and if you are just dying and you cannot wait for Amazon or the library, I have a copy in my office, and I would be happy to let you to read it.
That's fantastic. So I will put those different methods on the blog piece that comes along with this. Dr. Wehler, thank you so much for taking time out today to chat about not only Honors 400, but also the research that you've been doing over the past, I'm assuming, couple of years now that it's taken you to do this.
Yes.
So thank you very much for coming down and talking to the Nightly News about what you've been up to.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. All right, so for Dr. Melissa Wehler, the Dean of the Humanities and Sciences Department, this is Professor Paul Miller, and we will catch you next time on the Nightly News Podcast.